Okay. So today, I think that we only have the one proposed agenda. And Sergey and Andrew, do you want to talk about the timeout in the execute pro?
Sure, I guess I can go first. So yeah, I had ran into an issue with exec probes, specifically like timeouts in exec probes. And then I had opened the PR. And when I initially opened the PR, it was actually only for Docker shim exec timeout probes failing. And then digging into the issue, I realized that basically I think exec timeouts for any container runtime is not being respected. And then yeah, Sergey had informed me, and I had no idea that there were actually like many attempts in the past from other people to fix the same issue. So we figured it'd be good to raise this in the SIG and figure out what are the next best steps. Anything you want to add, Sergey?
Yeah, just to add some color to that. Previous attempts were trying to solve problem, and they're trying to solve extra issues that can be caused by this problem. So like one PR attempted to kill process in Docker because Moby doesn't support the timeout on process execution. They were trying to kill the process from a kubelet. We also saw this people raising questions about readiness probes have processes stuck on a container, so they can overwhelm, like probes can overwhelm the container and kill it. Yeah, finally we have this issue discussions that people who wouldn't expect timeouts to be enforced in a new version may be affected by that. So we need to raise awareness, and the question is how we can raise this awareness. And if we have this risk of affecting customer workload, do we want to do it gradually or like somehow like approach it differently? Maybe start with reporting errors, and then in next version we can enforce the timeout properly. So yeah, we need to discuss all those questions.
Yeah, like I think the tricky thing here is that in some scenarios, specifically with Docker shim, it'll run the exec, ignore the timeout, and then it'll let the process continue running and then return with a nil error, which signals to the probe that, you know, things passed when it didn't. And so by like introducing a timeout, all of a sudden, even though we're now respecting what the API is saying we should do, if there are workloads that are depending on this like odd behavior of just letting a process run forever, and then we're all of a sudden killing the process, that could lead to some weird scenarios. And so like in my PR, I actually specifically left that behavior intact. So like an exec process would never be killed, but we would just return an error to the probe so that we signal to the probe that the probe should fail. But yeah, I agree, like there's a lot of factors there that we should consider.
So I'm curious if anybody on the call knows the history of those timeouts. I bet it came up before, and I don't know the history here.
Sorry, okay, go ahead. Sorry,
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was going to ask, like, do we know where we're at with CRI errors? Because I think a large part of why this bug exists is because different runtimes return different errors for the timeout behavior. And so like with containerd, it's specifically expecting like a gRPC error code, whereas with Docker shim, I forget what it's doing. But then there's also like a generic util exec error that we're expecting from the prober, which every runtime should return. And so like I think the problem arises because we are like the actual prober is swallowing the error and ignoring it, whereas we should be having like well-defined errors for like timeout scenarios and whatnot.
Yeah, I saw the Alexandra have the comment on the duplicate of the Docker shim. Yes, that's what we wanted to do for a long, long time. And yes, I agree, it's overdue. And yeah, but based on what Andrew and Sergey said here, it is initially, I think there's the problem. I believe that Andrew did brought this to the signal, if I remember correctly, and it looks like it is the only Docker shim related problem, and container D handled very well. We saw the container D all cry out. At least I remember that meeting. The cry out. Think about they handled that cases, but it looks like this is not handled. At least for the container D, it's not handled. So can I ask one question for Andrew? So it's just like sounds like the not all the case we in the execute prop we do have the timeout value specified, and so you just notify in some scenario or majority scenario we didn't respect that timeout value. Is that true?
Yeah, I think
yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think the issue of containerd is not that we didn't respect timeout, it's just we didn't treat timeout as a failure. Is it right, Andrew?
Yeah, exactly. Like we return an error on timeout, but the prober expects like a nil error, but then the result to be like failed. But we were returning failed and error, and so it was ignoring it. And so it changes based on the type of probe because, for example, readiness probes are not ready by default, and so it would be not ready forever. Whereas liveliness probes start as successful and then they turn to failure to restart pods, and so liveliness probes would be successful regardless of the timeout. So whatever the like beginning state of a probe is, that would be the forever state because the timeout error was never respected.
Hey, this is Michael. I think for a lot of this, we need some type of typed errors in the CRI API because if it's just implicit that CRI different implementations are supposed to return consistent things, like it's never gonna work. Like if we could have these things where CRI either does gRPC error codes that the runtime implementations can implement, then that makes it a lot easier, I think, and would solve a lot of this.
Yeah, I agree. This is, I think the current PR I have open is kind of looking to be more like a stopgap solution to make sure that exact timeouts are respected with existing runtimes, but I definitely agree that there should be generic CRI errors that we can use for timeouts.
Actually, on the low levels, on OCI level, if you do like OCI compatible runtime, OCI exec, you are not able to specify exact timeout, so it will work until it finishes.
Alexander, yeah, you're right. And also, I just refresh my memory. In the past, we talked about this one. So I think there's the documentation also say that we want to execute the probe itself handle in some way handle off the timeout value. This is kind of a debate for a while because I just share with here, and so people worry about is execute because execute is a little bit free format ad hoc, and there's the one side of the debate. It is worry about execute the probe itself have the bug, and then cause of the real container application container fail, and another people just think about, okay, they want to execute probe to make sure the container run happily and also is ready to serve their demand. And so they want, when the execute the probe, it is a fail, they want to have a restart of the container. Just give the error and restart the container. So this is a refresh my memory. This is basically, it is, we didn't really finish that discussing and also that work for the CRI. And I need to follow up. I need to look into the previous discussion where we ended, and then we can make decision on here. But you just refresh my memory about the previous debate where we ended. Yeah.
So was a debate that we don't need timeouts, or on OCI level, or was a debate how was we need to run exec at all?
So it's the firmer. It is, do we need the timeout value? So the initially the documentation say, okay, since we haven't we haven't agreed upon, so we basically pound off that timeout value, the timeout handling into the execute implementation. So you need to careful like when you execute and set a timeout value, and but now it is the time to raise this problem. So we need to define on the CI level and to see what we want to do.
So if you want timeouts to be respected, and I think it has a lot of value, we can go ahead with latest PR from Andrew. The only question is, do we need to raise awareness for people who currently using, like, relying on current behavior, maybe not even realizing that they rely on current behavior, and whose payload can be affected? So the most critical issue that we found is startup probes. Like if somebody implemented startup exec probe and didn't realize that this probe running longer than timeout, and we will start suddenly failing on timeout, and container will never start. So are we okay taking this risk, or we need to raise awareness, or like we need to have some gradual approach here?
We do have other thing, right? The start initial. We do have another field, right? So initial delay, second at the startup time, right? So that's configurable, right?
It is configurable, but people may be affected once they deploy a new version. So with a new version of Kubernetes, payload that used to be working, even though like it was relying on something that on a bug basically in our system, will stop working.
The default is also 1 second, if I remember correctly, and that's pretty short for most workloads. In my experience, I've run into this problem once or twice.
Yeah, and I think in addition to startup probes, liveness probes could be pretty problematic as well, because they start as successful, and like if you're running an exec probe that never timed out, then that pod would never be restarted. But then if we enforce the 1 second timeout, then on a new version, those pods could be restarting quite often.
Well, what's considered a timeout for one of these probes? Like, is it that it exits? Because like a probe curling something, like it could take more than 1 second, but it's still valid and alive. So
yeah, I think the timeout is if it doesn't exit, right?
yeah, so when you're using a probe into some user-defined call, like having a timeout is very like hard, I guess, because
Yeah.
like what if they have a curl this, sleep one, curl this again, then you're getting false positives.
Yeah, just this is yeah, this is the original debate. And another thing it is so if you fail and you just retry, or you just unraise the timeout arrow, or you need to restart the container, and the different cases have the different requirement. So this is why earlier I shared there's the debate. So then we decided need proper implementation to handle that timeout value.
Yeah, so I think like from the API perspective, we definitely should be handling the timeout. It's just a weird state because there was a bug that never respected it. And due to that, there are workloads that might rely on the bug. So the bug has become a feature, I guess, in this sense. So like I'd be in favor of I think the end state we want to get to is that the timeout is respected. Maybe it'd be enough just to have in the release notes like a big warning saying this timeout was never respected. Now it is, so make sure your workloads are adjusted for that. But I don't know if we have to be more careful than that.
I'm a little bit confusing, Andrew. What did you suggest? So we respect that timeout value, and when the timeout, and we just kill the container and restart the container, or you suggest we just announce that timeout, because I do know we have the field, and announce that timeout, it is deprecated more clearly, and then we just told the user to implement timeout in their own probe.
No, I'm saying that we should respect the timeout, but not kill the exec probe, but like run the exec for however long it needs to. But like the timeout indicates whether the probe is going to return a successful result or a failed result.
So that's why the Michael and I just both raised some question, which is what we debate in the past. So your timeout that probe, but it could be like the timeout, it is the probe implementation have problem. Could be just call too many things, or maybe some other and or maybe it's just because that timeout value set too small, and you upgrade your application right now, and that to take a longer time than before. So in this case, should we time out that the timeout and then kill off the container, or it is just say, okay, this is just timeout? So there's the more like the, to me is more API level of discussing to understand the more context, and so and also so how we are going to address that one. So this is kind of the open question before when we first design of the CRI and we didn't reach consensus, and looks like we never come back this one. So thanks for read this again, and then we realized we haven't finished this one.
So Don, are you suggesting that we'll have a new setting saying like whether timeout is failing container or not, basically whether timeout is a failure or not, and then we can introduce this change with this setting, and people who want old behavior can revert it back, and people who want new behavior will keep it the default?
No, I was just think about there's the good reason behind we ask people to implement of that timeout in the prober, and so then treat the if you have to do that one, then treat the timeout as the failure, then we kill the container. So then basically it is punt this one into the decision is more to the application owner, and also more to like the each application, not just the owner, like the implementation, the developer, and also even to like the SRE, application SRE, because when they upgrade to new application, so they need examine that new version of the application container, and then reset this timeout by re-implement of the execute the probe. So that's the reason. Of course, I didn't say that that's the way we have to do it, but I just think about there's the real reason behind. So we need the answer, and I haven't said that we answer that yet. And so unless we answer that one, I'm not sure how we are going to move forward on this one, because it definitely have the regression, right, to the existing use cases.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite get it. So are you arguing that we don't have to respect timeouts? Or like if you redevelop from scratch, do we have to respect timeouts? And are you trying to solve the problem of very next version? How do we introduce timeouts back? Or you're talking about long-term, whether we need this timeouts at all? And maybe on API surface, it will be separate setting whether timeout is critical or not critical.
It does seem a little bit odd to me that we have a field in the pod spec that we're choosing not to respect. I think if we didn't already have the field, then Dawn, maybe I can see not respecting timeouts ever being a better option, but it does seem, I think in the issue, it is a bug what people are pointing out, that it isn't respected. It almost sounds to me like our defaults are bad if fixing this behavior is actually going to result in a large number of users being hurt by it.
So I agree with you, David, but back to the Sergey original ask the question, definitely I won't make the timeout once I default the 1 second.
Sorry,
Don. I don't think, or at least I couldn't hear that.
Yeah, you've been breaking up.
And for the timeout, I agree with you from high level. But back to the Sergey's original question, if we build this from scratch, I definitely don't want the timeout value by default is 1 second. And for me, I think timeout value by default should be way more longer. That's kind of like the catch-all, like the worst scenario, because you don't want that way it's being hanged forever. So it will be definitely set a reasonable time. And so in general, timeout value, but back to the Sergey's orange by default is 1 second. And the scenario, because you don't want that way it's being hanged. So in general, timeout value for a high level, and that's scratch. I definitely don't want that's kind of the catch-all reasonable time. And I may don't want to implement something like this arbitrary execute prob, and we'll have some format. And this is initially we also argued, which I kind of don't like, right? But that's the way we implement, and that's the way people using, because we give up, we compromises just for adoption, for easy to using. So that's why we give up, try to make that more aligned with the Docker at that time back then, but that's today's reality. So, but I just share. I didn't say we don't want to move forward to solve this problem, but I just want to share there's the background, the context, so make the things a little bit more complicated. And we could just say, okay, we are just. This is exactly reason in the when later implementation, even we have the timeout value, but the people didn't really, only certain cases we respected. And I believe there's the cases we still respected, but some use cases is not respected. And it's because the real use cases behind the thing. So maybe we could change this one, make the default value much longer, and then we can start to respect. And I don't know I haven't think through this one. I don't know what's the risk for the user who not properly set timeout value at this moment and rely on this one. So maybe we need to think about that one more. Yeah.
I think timeout value is shared across all type of probes, and 1 second may be okay for like basically HTTP probe, but may not be fine for exact probe.
Would it be possible to not have a default and push this timeout strictly to the user? Because like I remember from the past, like Docker days and stuff, default timeouts are extremely hard because it depends on machine, how much workload is doing it. Maybe 1 second is quick on a high compute instance, but 1 second is long on a high compute instance, but on a Raspberry Pi, 1 second is totally acceptable. So like, if you could do away with any default and just say a timeout's a user level concern, then that may be able to not introduce any breaking changes.
Yeah,
Would,
Michael, that's a little bit, I think maybe that's the way for us to avoid the big regression and by site really big timeout. I mean, not that big, but at least way better than today's 1 second.
Yeah, I see, because you don't want it just hanging forever. But
Yeah.
yeah,
it's changing the
it's
default.
really hard.
It's changing the default either by like enforcing that it's required or like making it longer. Also, could that also be considered a breaking change in some way?
Yes, yes, but at least even it's the breaking change, but it's still it's not like the way we used to handle certain things or relative. You have to think about the risk, right? So giving the risk and from the user's perspective, it is breaking change. So we still have to make sure that it is being announced properly. But and also it is the APS semantics change, and but consider to just without any default value and just simply say, okay, it's the user's configuration, and now we don't. So you may end up cause more problem, right, in the user's production, even we make a lot of announcement. So this is more from the cluster healthy perspective to thinking for the user before they understand what's the change, why we're doing such things, make such a semantic change, but at least we catch all, handle those use cases for them.
Okay, because I do see a scenario where expanding the timeout could become just as problematic as enforcing the timeout. For example, like if you have a readiness probe and you relied on short timeouts to make sure traffic to that probe is, you know, quickly failing over, and then you expand that timeout to like, let's say like 5 seconds, then, you know, and you're relying on that default 1 second, that could be problematic too.
Yeah, that's true. So this is another topic we used to talk about, similar like the restart policy. And since Sergey asked if build from scratch, so we initial implementation I have actually is the separate time of the value and also delay time, but for simplicity for the pod, because people think about the pod spec already a little bit overcomplicated, so we compromise and make that the same. And the similar to the restart policy. Restart policy initially, what I have also is the per container, and then have like the per pod. Also, so but also for the simplicity, easy to using, we compromise and made that it is per pod, and so yeah, Andrew, that's really valid use cases. Yeah.
Should we start with software failures? Like instead of failing on timeout, we can just start writing errors, indicating that in future version it will be affected, and maybe have a feature flag that will enforce timeouts as failures. And then in future versions, we can safely assume that people already saw these error messages, and they will start setting the defaults, and then we can switch this feature flag on by default. So basically, do we need to develop some rollout plan? If we all agree that we want to go this direction, we need to understand how we notify users
Okay. I don't think
beyond just the documentation.
I think we haven't agreed yet. So that's the real problem, right?
Oh, okay.
We just read a lot of the problem, and looks like there's no one size fit all situation at this moment.
But I think we agree. I think we agree that the timeout, like the ideal scenario, is that the timeout is respected. But we're just in a weird situation because there was a regression that didn't respect it, and we don't want to break users. Like, we can agree on that, right?
Yeah. So since we also have like the init delayed value, and so let's think about all those prob. We also recently add another prob, right? So startup. So looks like do we think about the combination of the init delay plus this like the execute timeout combination can cover all those scenarios?
I think we just don't know. Just so many unknowns. Like maybe init timeout will help us, or maybe most customers, like maybe this delay will not be in init timeout. Maybe it will be in later probes.
But also, like, if we're expecting users to like increase their init delay seconds for the probe, I would expect that, like, we can also expect them to just increase the exec timeout as well.
So looks like we have too many unknown, and it looks like we don't understand all the use cases. And can we step back instead of rush to make decision at this moment? Can we take a look at the liveness prob, startup prob, since we added that new one, and then readiness prob, and also two failed, elite delay, and also the timeout, and think about all the combination, how the user can config, and then we could at least provide here's what we are thinking from the SIG Node community, and from the high level guidance to the user. Can we see we cover all those things?
Sure. Yeah, I can try to put together like a summary of the current state of this, and maybe I can share next meeting.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. I think that would be help us to make the decision. But I do agree, since we have the field there, and we either should make decision, it is the respect that field, or just public announced, it is deprecate that field, right? So we have to obviously deprecate that. It's way harder than just respect, but we still need to understand that first, and then we can see for all the combination use cases how we are going to respect.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Any other topic?
Yeah, hey, my name's Billy McFall. I did have a topic, and I don't know if it's for this group or not. It's the first time I've been here, but I'd like to bring it up, and then you can just tell me it's not. That's fine. And I couldn't figure out how to move that bullet left. It looked like it was up under the other topic. I couldn't figure out how to get it left. So there was an existing PR from Derek Carr on exposing huge pages through the downward API, and it died off due to inactivity. I was just curious if there was a technical reason. Did it just die off because just no one had time to work on it, or whether it was abandoned because other methods or other thoughts were out there on how to do this? I looked above in this document, and some of the future work did have some huge pages stuff for 118. So I was just curious, you know, if I were to pick up this PR and push it back up and try to finish it out, would it get rejected, or is there any interest in it?
I believe that is abandoned because we believe there's the other way to solve the original reason. But because I just opened that PR, but I forgot the detail. Unfortunately, Derek is not here. So who is the original author? Is Derek here already? Yeah, he's not here because So we can talk about this one. You can ask through the SIG Node. This is the right community and right meeting to talk about this topic obviously. And you can reach through the SIG Node Slack channel and ask. And also I can follow up this one with Derek directly after this meeting. So then we'll share more about why we close that one. But I remember we talk about this one because we think about there's the other initial region. So I'm not sure your use cases you want this one. So maybe we already covered what you want, or maybe we didn't. So can you share more?
Yeah, I'm basically looking at how to run like a DPDK based application within a container. And most DPDK applications need huge pages. So when you fire up the application, you need to tell it basically how many huge pages he's allowed to use. So as of now, I've just been hard coding it and just kind of like making sure that I've given it enough, but I would like to be able to pass that value into the pod and allow him to read it. And as far as I know, there's no way today within the pod to read how many huge pages have been allocated for it.
Okay.
You can indirectly read it. So for each process, you can find out the name of the C group, and from C group huge page limits, you can get the value.
Okay, so technically I can get. I just have to dig a little harder to find it.
Yeah, it's not convenient, but Linux kernel exposes it.
Okay. All right. I mean, if that's a workaround or the preferred way to do it, maybe I should look at that. I just know that this one was out there when I first started looking into it, and so I was just following up on whether there was a reason this one closed or not.
So Billy, it is worth to bring this up back to the Derek because just like the Alexandra, it is the way you can get, but it's not the best way, easy way. So we give up is also try to avoid the unnecessary feature over complicate our code base. So, but if it's needed, it's open to discussing if customers. So raise that question to the Signal the channel, but just try to, yeah. So there's the workaround, obviously, and but it's open to discussing if we have more demand like this. So.
Okay, I will raise it there then.
Thanks.
Don, actually related to that, it might be interesting to have a more discussion about more generic topic, like to have some downward API which will expose overall container resource request and limits in parsable way. Like
Yeah.
not only with huge pages, but also, for example, like extended resources.
That's so right. Yes. Actually, we talk about this because this is one of the features in the book people ask for, but we never really in the Kubernetes we never really move forward on that one. This is a good topic we can discuss. Yeah, and maybe you want to propose this one next week to talk about this like the generic of the downward API to native application nodes their resource limit and the request.
Probably yes. I need to sync up with my colleague because he wanted to write a KEP for exactly that proposal. But I need to check the status.
Sure. Cool.
I have one more question just while I'm here. Does anyone know the code freeze deadline for 1.20? I've been Googling around and I don't see it out there because I would like to try to be able to do this in the next release. And so I was curious what my time frame was on trying to get this in.
Jorge was on the line, and Jorge is in release team, I think. Jorge, do you know?
I'm checking right now. I don't know. I haven't been up to Usually the schedule is posted in the SIG release repo within the Kubernetes organization, and I'm Googling right now, but the deadlines should be more or less similar to the ones for last year, for the release around for the release that was around this time last year, which was 117. I'll post it in Slack as soon as I find it in the release notes.
Thank you.
Any other topic?
Sorry, really quick. I actually just found it. The proposed deadline for code freeze, November 12th. The proposed deadline for enhancement freeze, October 6th.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, looks like that's all for today. And also we have the 2 topic for next week, looks like. Maybe potential have the 2 topic. One topic, it is Andrew come back and talk about all the use cases on all the prop and to see. And another topic, it is maybe Alexandra and Michael and propose generic downward API for the resource request and the limit for the each container, application container. So that's for next week. So far we have the 2.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay,
Who,
thank you.
Who was doing resources? I just writing down for agenda.
Alexandra and Michael.
Alexander, okay.
Okay, thank you everyone, and have a good day. Bye.